So I push that button. It'll say, do you want to load this scene? Here's your yes, no buttons. I say yes. You just put everything back.
Gotcha.
So if you have like 4 musicians and you have all their mics and their instruments running through the board and everything is where you want it, but they're sound wise, and you have the headsets where you want them and everything's cool, and you've got all that working just right,
Yeah.
you can save that whole, everything you just did.
And we shouldn't have to be.
You can come,
Well, I will challenge that a little bit because this is what I try to teach. I love mixing audio. It's just a passion of mine. Mixing, for me, is very active. It's playing an instrument, just like
It is.
people on the stage, right?
So when they're getting loud, you want to be able to do that.
I'm mixing. I
Yep.
mix every week for our church, even
Yep.
though I'm the lead pastor
I
there.
didn't want to lose control of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it is an active, constant thing that I'm doing,
Right.
just playing an instrument. So that's why I want to get you used to it enough that you're not scared to do stuff, right? So I don't want to get to where it's, okay, CSD set this, don't touch anything.
Right.
No, I want you to touch it. I want you to be confident enough in it that you can mess with it.
we were at a concert with Celtic Women at the Coliseum one time, and their sound guy had massive boards. And on one of the breaks, we're down there talking to him. It's like, wow, they're so good. And he said, they sound so good because of what I'm doing.
This is what I
He said
always say.
they got the talent and the voices, but the reason they sound so good in here is because of this.
You can't make bad sources sound great,
Right.
but you can make
Good.
great and
Yeah.
good sources sound amazing. So, yeah, there's not anything I can do with a bad source. But, all right, where was I? So that's what scenes are. If I wanted to save a scene, it's just go to an empty slot. This one says save. I would push it, and it would say, what do you want to call it? Everything, since we're here, let me show you this. Everything on here, whenever you're naming anything, this is a lot like an Xbox or something. It uses these 3 different character sets, and then this is your moving around. Anything that's highlighted in here is always orange. So you'd go through here and name it whatever you
And the
want.
select is just pushing it,
And it's
right?
just push, yep. You get lowercase over here, you get numbers here, so you have the 3 different character sets. And so it's just naming it whatever you want with the different character sets. And then when you get what you want, you hit save, and it'll pop up and put it in there. Okay? I will.
But now, if you ever want to, if for some reason you can't adjust things as long as that's in, but you can't get out of that if you want to just adjust that.
Oh, this will, yeah, you can still adjust things and do whatever you want. This will just return you to whatever you saved it as when you hit
Okay.
save.
Okay.
Like, if you're working on a document on a computer, and you've already saved it, and you reopen it, it's what it was. If you start making edits to it, you can make as many edits as you want. But if you don't save the edits, it goes back to what it was we saved before.
Yes. It's very much a computer is what it acts like. Okay. Let me go to this set of 8. Again, the master is always the master. So there's another set of 8 here right next to it though. And these tend to be more about outputs. This side's more about inputs. This side's more about outputs. The first level is what's called DCAs, digitally controlled amplifiers. In analog days, they used to be called VCAs, voltage controlled amplifiers. Basically, this is a way for you to group things. So, for instance, sometimes one of the ways I use a DCA is if I'm miking a drum kit and I've got 8 mics on a drum kit. I'll bring them all into 8 separate channels. I'll mix them, relative to each other and get kind of the relative balance between all the mics. And then I'll make a DCA, which becomes basically a master fader for all of those together. And so the way I create that is if I had my drum set in these first 8, I would hold this select button down, and I simply select the channels that I want this fader to control. And as soon as I let go, now this becomes a master fader for all of those channels that I select.
Relative to each other the way you have them
Yep,
set.
it would be just like if they kept their relative
Yeah.
position, but it was doing this.
Yeah.
Say that again, you hold the select button down and then,
And select the
Select whatever
channels
channels
that you
you
want.
want.
okay,
I'm gonna unselect them, but,
okay.
and you can do, you know, things on different layers, doesn't matter. That's, you just select the channels that you want that one to control.
Gotcha. So you can select multiple layers
Mm-hmm.
to all tie to that one fader?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what layer they're coming in on. So you've got 8 of those that you can set. I typically am not gonna use them a whole lot if I'm just running some microphones and stuff. It's more, you may get into it if you had a lead vocal and background vocalist, and you wanted to put all the background vocalists on one, so you could, you know, you could control all of the background vocals with one. Or some people like to do a DCA for the whole band and a DCA for all the vocals. I don't tend to like to group them that much together, but you can use them for whatever you want. Okay? So that's the first 8. The next layer is actually just a duplication. It says bus 1 through 8, and it is exactly the same as this bus 1 through 8. It's just another place to grab it. Okay? That's really there because a lot of times people use this as a monitor board with a band, and it's easier to have my buses over here that are controlling my monitors so that I can stay on my input layers over here and not have to keep flipping back and forth. So it's the same as this layer, it's just a different place to get to them. It's the same with this button. This is the same as this layer. So if I move them one, just a second place to grab the faders. The bottom one, however, is different. This is you have 6 matrices and a mono center channel that we're not using because you don't have a subwoofer hooked up yet. If you want a subwoofer, we'll get you one.
Show me the 6 matrices.
These 6 right
Okay,
here.
and that's,
MTX
you hit that.
Yep, the
Gotcha.
bottom one. A matrix is basically the same as a bus, except it will actually take multiple buses as a collection point, as well as a collection point of the left-right output. So I actually set one up. If you didn't want to use this and wanted to record on the Gemini, I set one up so that Matrix 1 would go into the Gemini. And so this would still control your master volume out here, and this would just control how much of that would be going to your recorder. So it's a separate, I'm just taking a feed from the left-right matrix, or left-right main into this matrix, and then routing it out to the Gemini. That's probably all you would, that kind of thing is about all you would use those for. We usually use them more for like delay speakers if we gotta set multiple sets of speakers and delay them and we need different outputs, or a lobby speaker, set of speakers and you wanna control those separately or something like that. That's kind of what they're used for. Okay, so does that make sense? All the faders, I know we haven't talked about this stuff up here yet, but the different layers of faders, does that all make sense? What they are? Okay. Real quick, I'll go over some of this other stuff and then we'll talk about just look at a channel strip. This is your scene area again that we were just looking at. These are assignable, user-definable keys. There's a couple of them set up for some reverb or delay tempos right now. I'm going to leave these again. We can set them to about anything. I don't know that you guys have need for that at the moment. These you can set up mute groups. Okay, every channel you can see has a mute button on it. Lit means it's mute, but the mute is on. So you can mute obviously each of them independently, or you could set up a mute group. Let me just make sure always forget if I have to set. No. Yeah, okay. So again, to create a mute group, it means with one button, I can mute multiple channels. So if I go to mute group up here, and then selecting the same thing as doing a DCA, right? I go, well, I want mute group 1 to mute all 8 of these channels at one time. So I select that, get out of mute group, and now with this one button,
That's cool.
I can mute them all at one time.
That's really cool.
And you can set 6 of those however you want. I think that only works on the inputs, if I remember right, or, well, DCAs don't really have mutes. It would work on the monitors, but it's the same concept. Mute group, hold whichever one you want, select the ones you want to add into that group, and then get out of mute group again. Sometimes different places use that like to mute everybody but the pastor, like the whole worship team except the pastor. So during that transition, when the pastor's coming up, you can hit one button, all the instruments get muted.
Oh, so you don't have to turn down
Good to know.
all the channels and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Fabulous.
Yeah, that's,
so that's one way.
That's a good idea.
or if you got a bad thing, you can just mute. Just one button, you're done.
Just realized I spelled that wrong. That was bugging me.
That's pretty cool, isn't it?
That is cool.
Yeah.
So that's what this stuff is. Up top here, you do have a way to use a talkback mic. In this room, I don't know that you'll need it, but you can plug it in. I think it's right over here, if I remember right. There's actually I would usually just use one. A talkback mic is a way for you here at the console to talk into it and have it come out the speakers up there so that you don't have to yell all the time. We usually obviously need it in larger rooms.
Yeah.
In here, I don't know if you'll need it, but it's there if you want it.
Okay.
Monitor level you won't use. Phones level. I don't know if you guys have a set of headphones or not. There are, you see these little indicators
Nice
here?
to have.
Yeah.
There are headphone jacks on each side inside the handles. They both are the same. You can plug in either one.
I keep people from talking to you during the service, feeling the need to come up and chat with me.
I've got,
And this will control the volume in your headphones.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Now, what goes to the headphones, if there's nothing soloed, what's going to the headphones is just what's the main mix, what's coming out of the main speakers. Every channel has a solo button. And if you hit a solo button, 2 things will happen. One is that channel gets routed to your headphones. It stops listening to the main mix, and it starts listening just to whatever you soloed. The second thing that happens is this rude solo light starts blinking, going, hey, don't forget,
This is only.
you're listening to something
Just
that's
one.
solo. Now, the cool thing is you can solo multiple things at once. You can solo as many things as you want. And so you're just adding things to your headphones that you're listening to. If you hit them again, it takes them out. But if I hit this blinking light, it clears all of them, and now I'm listening back to the main mix again. So that's the function of the headphones. We use them a lot during rehearsals. Sometimes you have multiple singers on the platform and you go, I don't remember what mic they picked up.
Right.
You solo their channel, listen to it and go, oh, that's this person. Okay.
Oh, that's
That'll be
smart.
good. That'll come in handy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remind me what these are assigned to already?
Tap delays on the effects.
Okay.
We don't mess with that.
You want me to turn
No,
those off?
I just was curious.
I just did one.
You said
Blinking
they
or
were,
making it
I didn't
go,
remember
what
what you
is it?
said they were.
Blinking.
I just did one, and I put an Allen and Heath board in a Baptist church last week in North Carolina, and I was doing the training, and they have their tap delay set, and it's right up here on a soft key next to the screen. And there was one lady, the drama lady, was like, "What is that blinking?" So I was telling her, she's like, "Is there any way to shut that off?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, but then you can't tap out your delay for the songs." So I showed her how to shut it off, so she could shut it off. It's just driving me crazy. I keep thinking there's something wrong.
Right.
Okay, then let me talk about this section up here, because this is kind of this is the bread and butter of how you're gonna create a good mix, okay? And I'm just gonna use this one kind of as an example. So I have this wireless handheld routed into channel 4 right now. Test, 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 am I on? Test, test, there we go. Testing, 1, 2. Okay, so remember in Analog World you had a channel strip, right? There was just a bunch of strips, they were all the same, but lots of different knobs.
Yeah.
That's what this section is here, except it's not in a
Old
vertical
pots.
strip anymore, okay? You have all of the same functions plus some stuff that you didn't have on your other mixer. What I like to tell people is that aren't real familiar with mixing is think of a channel as a water pipe, and the signal that's going down it is the water that's flowing through it, okay? And the first thing that we're gonna hit up here is like a valve that we're gonna call gain. It's this one right here. It was at the top of your analog mixer, right? It's the first thing the signal hits coming in. This is very important. Gain structure is very important to getting a good mix. The gain is basically there so that when we have all these different channels, all these different water pipes, we have all kinds of different signals coming in. We have microphones, we have CD players, we have instruments, we have all these things coming in. All of those things come in at different voltages, okay? They're different levels. What we want to try to do with the gain knob is get all of them to the same general, you're kind of pre-mixing. We try to get them all at about the same level so that everything we do after this is working with about the same voltage level of signals no matter what it is. On a digital board, every channel has a meter here, and then this meter will reflect whatever is selected. Test, test, so you can see it's going to go basically with that. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. With these two should be the same basically because I have that selected. So when I'm talking on a digital board, I'm going to turn this up until I get to in the yellow, okay? When I get into the yellow, about -212 on my peaks, that tells me I'm getting a strong enough signal in there that I can do everything I need to do with the signal and have enough gain to route things different places. And eventually if you ever get to personal mixers on stage, up there where people can, control their mix themselves, this will be important because if you change this gain, you're changing the signal that's being fed up to them as well. And you want to get this set kind of in rehearsal or quickly at the beginning and then leave it. Because, like I said, this will also affect floor monitors. So if you get a mix in your floor monitor, you look up halfway through the service and go, oh, that gain's not right, I better turn that up. You just messed up the mix of the floor monitor. So, first thing you always want to do is get that gain set. You will have to use more gain on wired microphones. What comes out of a microphone is a very low voltage, and you have to boost it a lot more than something like a CD player. Anything that's direct like that coming out of electronics typically has a fairly high level. So this will actually work. You can set that gain even without anything coming through. I just want to get up to that yellow, test 1, 2, test 1, 2, and now I know that I've just given it enough signal that I can do everything I need to do.
Say this again, so when you see this go yellow, you're,
That's how you want to be.
what are you
Test,
manipulating?
test.
Show me where you,
If I keep turning this up, it's keep going up. If I turn this down, no matter how loud I get, it
You
never
can't get
gets
in
up.
there.
I don't get enough
once it
signal.
touches that, then,
So I want to set this so that I'm hitting in the yellow.
Gotcha.
Test, test. If I go too loud, you'll see that clip light come on. that's a bad thing. Now, the reality is in digital world, this has a lot of headroom. You're still fine. You can't hurt anything, but it will start self-limiting. And it could distort some and give you some not great sound. So I would run this, right up in there, and once I kind of get it set, now if somebody's singing, they're usually singing louder than they're talking, so you may turn that down. But get that set at the beginning, and then you could tweak everything else, but try not to tweak that again. Okay?
Yep.
All right. So after we get that gain set, the next thing that hits is a low-cut filter. This will show you basically the channel strip. I actually should show you this. This home button will show you the channel strip, all of these things kind of laid out in order. There's kind of a glare right there, isn't there? So we're going to hit each one of these sections here by looking at each one of them individually, but this is the whole signal chain all in one thing.
This right here, right?
Yep, it actually kind of goes like this.
Oh, okay.
It hits these two, then comes here, and then these two. But here it's laid out all in a line.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to kind of just go through each of these tabs. That's going to take us through each of these areas. The next section, or the next thing it hits is a low-cut filter. If it's lit, it means it's engaged. I would tell you to low-cut everything. That's my opinion. This is actually easier to see when we get to the EQ section, so I'm going to skip over that for just a second. I'm just going to turn it on for right now.
So the low cut, what does that do?
I'll show you when we get to the
Okay.
EQ. It's easier to see it on the screen when
All
we
right.
get there. It then comes to a gate. If you guys have not had gates before, to simplify, I'll just tell you what it is, but you're probably not going to use it right now. It is an electronic on-off switch. If I engage it, and I can set the threshold where when the signal level gets above it, it opens the channel. When the signal drops below it, it closes the channel. So if I were to put this up here like this, test, 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 even though I'm talking into it, it's closed. Test, test, test. This is used for two things. One is we use them a lot on drums where we have individual mics, and we don't want the tom mic that's sitting right over the tom to be letting signal in every time the snare drum gets hit.
Right.
We only want it to open up when
it's
the
really
tom
hit.
gets hit, right? So we'll put a gate on it and try to set the level so that when the snare's being hit, it's not open, but when the tom hits, the level's big enough that it opens, lets it pass, and then it closes again. You guys aren't running that right now. The other thing you can use it for is a troubleshoot fix. Every once in a while, I'll run into an electric guitar that has really bad hum. And when they let go of the strings, it just sits there and goes zzz in their pickup. And so I may use this as a way with a really low threshold just so that when he's not playing, it just shuts off. And as soon as he hits a string, it opens back up and we're fine. Those are the kinds of things it's more of a troubleshooting tool than something to use as a technique. So for you guys, I probably wouldn't use it. What you may use though is compression. You now have compression on every channel. Compression is a great way to help tighten up your mix. What it does is takes the signal, you can see this bouncing back and forth as I'm talking. That's my signal level. If I turn on the compressor and pull this down, when it hits a certain level that we call the knee, it basically says anything above this level, for every 1 unit level of volume that comes in, I'm only going to let it go out at like a third or a fourth of that level. So it squashes the dynamic range above a certain level. When is that useful? I don't know if you guys get excited when you're talking. If you have
No,
someone
never.
who goes, that gets really loud all of a sudden, if you have your compressor set, that loudness, instead of being 1 to 1, could be 1 to 3, right? It also, you can run this threshold down further and then boost it back up to get some of the gain back up. And if I run most of the time in that compression, the differences between my lows and highs become less, so it stays more consistent.
Nice.
Does that make sense? So when I get real soft, you can still hear it, but when I get real loud,
It
it's
doesn't
not
always well.
overpowered.
So this is a setting, it's not something you're doing as they're getting crazy up there,
It's something that I'm adjusting
as it's going.
as it's going, usually. I usually could get it close and then leave it. You know, do you guys do any rehearsal or anything for the music? Okay. I would try to set that during rehearsal usually and not constantly be messing with it.
Not always the same.
Okay. So, yeah,
Show, rehearsal.
it's something that, play with it. You're not gonna, it's not such a big change that you're gonna totally change the sound of something by messing with the threshold. It's just a really helpful tool to get everything leveled out more. There's lots of settings on that you can use. I'm not going to show all those to you because it'll just get confusing. The two that I'll show you are, this is the threshold, which shows you when does the compressor engage. This red part is telling you that's how much it's compressing it. So this is adjusting when it engages. And then the second knob is the ratio. You can see I can set a ratio up to 100, which is really what's called a limiter. And that means no matter how loud I talk, it'll never get louder. I mean, it's just whatever goes in stays at that level. So this ratio determines the slope of that line. Okay? See that? A 3-to-1 ratio is a good starting point for most things, 3 to 4 to 1. Now, when I do this, notice though, I'll show you the third thing you can mess with on this one. So threshold ratio, and this is what we call makeup gain. Okay, when I engage this compressor, you notice that even when I'm talking normally now, I lost some volume. Well, that means I either got to now boost this up, or there is what's called makeup gain, which is basically, here's how I typically set things. Like if I'm working with a vocalist, they're singing, I'm going to move this threshold until I get 3 to 4 dB of compression on them while they're singing, and then I'm going to put that gain back with the makeup gain. So now I get back to my same volume level, but I've compressed how much the difference their lows and highs make. So with those 3 controls with compression, you can get pretty far. Does that make sense? Compression is a whole art by itself, but that's the basics of it. Okay? So we've snaked our signal through here, and now we get to the real fun, which is the EQ. And let me start by, I brought a few of these, and you can either keep them here or hand them out and make copies. I only got 3 of them here, but our ears do not hear the same loudness at every frequency, okay? So up at the top here, what you're seeing are what are called equal loudness curves. There have been studies shown, and think of these kind of, the lower the graph is, the more sensitive our hearing is. So our ears are designed so that we hear the best in kind of this 1 to 3 kilohertz range. And that's because that's where a lot of our voice is. Our hearing is actually tuned in to hear voices more than other things. You can see that it takes, up here even at 80 decibels, it can take up to 10 times as much energy for a low bass sound at 30 hertz to sound like the same loudness to us as something at 1,000 kilohertz. So each of these red lines is what they've studied to say that sounds like the same volume across that line at